Is everyone staring at us like we're having an affair? Well, you did have that affair, right? Looking at the fetus app on his phone was the worst thing I ever did to Thomas. And what about the times you read his messages? Well, yes, there was that. How's that son of yours? Xavier, is it? Don't have any children. That critic lied. Here he is now. You must be so happy to have him home. Look at all that stuff he's taking over. I have to get out of here. The metal and glass table was so big it took 17 men to carry it up the stairs. Table? Oh, I forgot it was there under all his books. We have always had pastries for breakfast. First, we don't have breakfast. There isn't time. Such a good son. You wouldn't know he was here. Xavier, that no-good bum, lying around on the sofa all day like he did his entire teenage years. Don't remember a single thing about him as a child. You're not going out like that, are you? Surely. I always go out like this. He's nothing like his father. Xavier and Thomas are so similar, like two barrels of the same shotgun. He demanded crackers and champagne, a ridiculous combo. We don't have crackers, we have charcuterie. Crackers, darling boy, crackers you shall have. Anything for you. Thomas, the crackers. Just crackers behind my back. How dare you bring crackers into our beautiful home? Anna, her touch as light as a feather. She startled me with those sharp claws. Do you like my scarf? Alas, Thomas is gone, but I will always have his scarf to remember him by. Fucking Anne. Do you mean Hannah? Anne? Hannah? Opposite shore. Rivers. Wife. Mistress. Mother. Good cop. Bad cop. Bad cop. Good cop. Ceiling lights. A desk lamp. And around me, the waiting darkness. Hello, welcome back to Rare Reads and my take on Katie Kitamura's Audition. Hope you enjoyed that little comedy intro. I am going to just talk, seriously now about the book. So this book was recommended to me by Great Books Prof, who is a booktuber that works in a university in America, and he teaches on a literature and a philosophy course. And he recommended it. He talked about it, and he talked about how surprising it is, and that it's got this great twist to it, and that it had a real head scratcher kind of thing. So that's kind of what made me, want to check it out, because I do like a head scratcher. I wouldn't say I didn't find it that surprising, but then I think it's because the way it had been sold is it's got this, massive twist to it sort of thing, and that it keeps you guessing all the time sort of thing. So I think maybe because it had been built up so much like that, so that it's split into two halves, the book, part 1 and part 2, and very early into part 2, there is the twist, but I'd already got there sort of thing. I didn't think it was that surprising. However, that aside, I still think it is a good book and well worth reading. So as you can see from the title of the video, is this the most unreliable narrator ever? Please do come at me on your thoughts on that. Certainly it is an unreliable narrator. I love that. Some of my favourite books have unreliable narrators. So Life of Pi, Holden Caulfield in Catcher of the Rye, Gatsby has an unreliable narrator, The Telltale Heart, and one of my favourite books of all time, The Third Policeman, which I know I still have to do a video about, maybe next time. So yeah, I like that about it. And also it's very, I would say, kind of very postmodern. It's playing around with the whole concept of what is the truth, what is the reality, and by the end of it, it's still quite ambiguous. You still don't really know. I think there's lots of different ways that you can interpret this. And obviously I'll give you some of my interpretations in this video. So part 1, is these two people meet. It's Xavier and the narrator. I don't think the narrator ever has a name. I'm pretty sure we don't know her name. So they meet in this restaurant, and it is very much you're supposed to be sort of trying to figure out what is their relationship, right? So they could be lovers. The narrator seems to feel like people are looking at them as if they are having an affair or in a relationship, and that she is being judged because she's quite a lot older than him. She also thinks that she sees her husband, Thomas, and seems to feel a bit awkward about that in terms of in case he's seen them. So there is a question mark over could they be in some kind of a relationship. But towards the end of part one, Xavier, I never know how to say that word properly. I hope I am saying it properly. He says that he thinks that she's his mother. So he's tracked her down. Where he's looking for his biological mother, and he's tracked her down and thinks that she may be his mother. And then she's kind of like, I can't possibly be your mother. I've never had any children. And then it turns out that he's read some article or something that's been written about her, I think as part of a review that's been done. So she is an actress. She's a stage actress and has made films as well. And so at some point, somebody's interviewed her and found out that she lost a baby. But the way that it's told in the first part is that she actually had an abortion, but the reporter, the critic that was writing this article, because they maybe didn't believe in abortion themselves, or because maybe they're worried that that might be controversial or something, the way that they word it is to make it sound as though she's actually given up a child. So therefore he thinks that he's been given up for adoption and that she is his biological. So that's kind of how part one is kind of like structured. And then you go into, and that she's in a play in part one called The Other Shore. So I think another thing that this book is doing is kind of, it's playing around with perspective and different perspectives. So the play that she's in in part one is The Other Shore. Then when we come to part two, it's called Rivers. So, it could be the same play, but so it is playing around with the idea of perspective, I think, as well. And in terms of, it depends which shore you're standing on, how you're going to perceive her and her story. Then we get into part two. And at the beginning of part two, she's been on stage, been acting in this play that she's in. And she's gone for dinner afterwards in a restaurant with family. So with Thomas and Xavier, her husband, her son, and Anna and some other people. So Anna is her director on this play. And there are times where you think that there's some resentment towards Anna, where maybe she feels that her relationship with Xavier is a threat to her as his mother kind of thing, because she's like becomes his mentor kind of thing. And so only a few pages in, basically, she explicitly tells us that she is. So she's been all the way through, part one. It's like, I couldn't possibly be your mother. I am not your mother. I've never had any children. And, the one child that she ever did conceive, she had an abortion. But then she tells us very quickly into the second part, or act two, if you like, that Xavier is sitting with them in this restaurant after the play. And Anne is on the one hand, and she says, and me on the other, Xavier's mother. So, and I think that is where you're meant to kind of go, oh, the gasp moment kind of thing. I think I actually laughed at that point. I think this book did make me laugh, and I don't think it's meant to. I don't mean this in a kind of mean way, or I'm not saying it's a bad thing, but there were moments that were so kind of like, I don't know, like melodramatic, that I did kind of laugh at it. But I'm probably not meant to have, and I'm sure a lot of people might want to come at me for that kind of thing, and you can do, but by all means, comment me your response to that, the fact that I did actually laugh out loud at points in this book. Maybe it's just my weird sense of humour, maybe. Okay, so all the way through the second half, I did feel like there was more flip-flopping in the second half, but I don't know if that's just me. But it does feel very extreme in terms of, and that's what I was doing in that, that little intro. So I'm not going to go spiel it all out again and give the examples again. But there are just these extreme, flip flops from, on the one hand, she thinks this, or she tells you this, and then literally it'll be in the next sentence, like, and yet this. Yeah. So, the sun was shining, and yet there was a big dirty great cloud in front of the sun, that kind of thing. But Taming of the Shrew, that happens in Taming of the Shrew, doesn't it? I seem to remember. But anyway, I quite like that, and that is the nature of an unreliable narrator, isn't it? But I just feel like in this book, maybe it's just more extreme in terms of the second half does build to a kind of what I would call a farcical climax, where it starts with the crackers and just the whole thing with, Xavier wanting crackers and her reaction to that, which seemed really extreme. And then it ends up with them all piled on the floor. They're all crawling around on their hands and knees at one point. Hannah at one point grabs Thomas's hand and puts it on her boob. And then in reaction to that, the narrator grabs hold of Hannah and drags her out, forcibly drags her out. And then you get Xavier calling her, I think you're fucking crazy, and just screams at her. And then he goes. So that's your kind of your your melodrama, your farcical stuff. But then it does come back down. And so the most sympathetic thing that we're told, I think, about this woman, this unreliable narrator, unnamed, comes in the first part, towards the middle of the first part, I think it is, where she tells us about a baby that she lost. And she talks about this 8 to 9 week period where she's carrying this baby, but ultimately ends up carrying a dead thing. And she has to give birth to a dead thing. And it is I found that really quite moving. And I'm not a family person. I've never wanted kids. I don't have a maternal bone in my body, but I did really find it really quite moving. And particularly, and I thought this was a really interesting kind of angle on this, where she talks about Thomas, the father of the baby, her husband, that she's sneaking around on him and she's checking his phone, and she finds this app on his phone. And it's an app where every day he can look at how big the fetus is, and it will compare it to, like I think at one point it's as big as a fig, or, something like that. So, and I just thought that was maybe that's a common app that everybody that has kids uses. I don't know. It's just not something I'd come across before. And I thought it was quite an interesting angle to kind of put on it, where, it wasn't her that was doing that. It was him. And it was something that he'd kept secret from her as well. So it's almost as if they're not on the same page when it comes to, do they really want this baby? And it seems like he wants the baby more than she does, kind of thing, which again, some people would judge a woman for that. Not me, obviously. But it seems a shame that, which is probably the most sympathetic that she is in the whole, or way that she's portrayed in the whole book, is kind of buried underneath all of this other stuff that comes afterwards, kind of thing. And although I think it is quite poignant, that last bit where she's just left in the darkness, it almost, because of what's just immediately come before it, almost as if that's what she deserves, that kind of, well, all you deserve is just to be left in the darkness and with nothing and with nobody, because you haven't put enough into your family. You've not put enough into being a mother. So this book is about identity. It's about her identity being very much rooted in her roles that she plays as an actress, and that she is, a lot of her self-worth and self-esteem is coming from the reactions that she gets, the responses she gets from her crowd, from her audience. So she's always looking for that affirmation. She's always looking for validation, kind of thing, in her performances and in the responses that she gets to them. And so as she's coming towards the end of this run, she's feeling very anxious, and she doesn't want it to, you get the sense she doesn't really want it to end, because then it'll be a kind of what now kind of situation. And I think there is a comparison to be made here with women who are mothers, who, once their children leave, have like empty nest syndrome. And it's like she's going to have empty auditorium syndrome or something. Yeah. And then, so at the very end, I'll just read that kind of last paragraph. Mostly there is only the emptiness they leave behind. Yeah. So that's what I'm saying, is I think there is a kind of, I think it's being used as a metaphor for empty nest syndrome. I do. The emptiness of having, played that part, and then it coming to an end. And then it's like, who am I now? Who am I now? This is not something that I will say to him. So she's talking about how she's going to communicate this to Xavier. This is something he must discover for himself. Instead, I stand on this stage in the story he has created, in the role he has made. So I guess, in other words, as his mother, at the point he's born, she becomes his mother, doesn't she? Before me, a face or two that I can pick out in the crowd, a chain of words, sturdy as a cable. So there it's mixed, isn't it? Because at one point she's saying, I'm his mother, but then she's talking again about being on stage. So then she's flipping back to being the actress again. A chain of words, sturdy as a cable. That cable you could see, couldn't you, as kind of the bond, between a mother-son. But she's obviously is here talking about, the connection between an actor and actress and their audience. A voice has been given to me. So she obviously thinks she's got some talent. You know, she is, I would say she's a little bit arrogant, this character. She's a lovey. And around me, the waiting darkness. So I do think it is a very powerful ending, actually. I think that is a great, absolutely cracking last line. It's right up there as last lines go, I think. It reminded me a little bit of Gatsby, you know, ending with the green light. It did remind me. I'm not comparing this to Gatsby. I think Gatsby's a way better book, but it did sort of it reminded me of Gatsby in terms of that ending and that final sentence. Ultimately, I would put this book in tier 3. I would recommend it. I think it was a cracking read in terms of it really kept me, you know, not that I'm that into page turners. I don't think, you know, that's like as much of an accolade as some people do, but it did really keep me turning the pages. It kept me very much engaged, and I found it quite entertaining as well. But there is depth to it as well, right? So what lets it down for me, I think, a little bit is I felt ultimately, because of the ending, the way it ends and everything, I did, you know, Thomas's Xavier's gone and he's called her, you know, this fucking crazy and whatever. You get the sense that the relationship is broken at that point. And I think we all kind of been, and again, you know, comment me whether you agree with this or not, I kind of feel like we're being positioned to judge her as an unfit mother or as a bad mother, which I feel like, you know, if you're, as a female writer, taking an older woman, an older protagonist, and doing that with them, I just felt a little bit disappointing. And I'm not saying, you know, I'm not saying you've got to write female characters as being perfect or they've not all got to be good. But yeah, it's fine to have morally grey characters and all that kind of, I'm fine with that. But it just did feel a little bit of a cop-out, like, you know, oh, we've got this older woman and she's a bad mother. So I didn't feel like we were being positioned necessarily to, you know, sympathise with her in the way that, in terms of the women's movement, feminism, and in terms of, you know, women having to make that compromise between a compromise that men don't have to make, you know, that compromise of, you know, career being sacrificed because you're going to put all your focus into being a parent. And, you know, and this is a big thing for actresses. There's a lot of actresses, a lot of people in film, TV, theatre, music as well, where once they've had a family, you know, they're kind of on the scrap heap essentially in terms of their career, or the only parts they can play is like, you know, a mother. So, and I feel like this is kind of almost like playing into that, which is a bit, you know, from a female writer is a bit disappointing. I found it, you know, and by all means, yeah, do comment me if you strongly object to that. And I'm not necessarily saying either that I disliked her. I'm just saying I feel like that's the way that we are intended to be kind of positioned. Yeah, I know I'm second guessing the writer now a little bit. Oh my God. But this is why I love books. This is why I fucking love books. Could be quiet because my dad's downstairs. It's just, something's just occurred to me, right? So that whole thing of, at the end, the sense of, there is an overriding, I would say, at the end, sense of like emptiness, like this empty auditorium, which also obviously I think is saying something about her life being empty. So like she's got this, you know, on the surface, what seems a very, very nice kind of a life that a lot of people would envy, in terms of she's an actress, in terms of she has had, you know, great reviews and critical, you know, acclaim, and also, you know, has had the adoration of, you know, the fans and whatever as well. You know, she can go out for meals in nice fancy, you know, they have the best breakfast, they have this lovely apartment. But I've just had shivers. Maybe what Katie Kitamura is saying is that there's no meaning in any, it's about that, isn't it? It's like about, there is no meaning in anything. Your life is going to just be a constant series of, you know, aspiring to something, reaching for something, you know, playing the best part, being the best mother you can, you know, maybe it's regardless of what part you choose to play in life, and it is your choice ultimately. And, you know, maybe she is both as well. but ultimately it's never going to be enough. What if that's what she's actually trying to say? Like, just underneath it all, there's just this sense of emptiness. If you are setting the bar too high for yourself, maybe that's what this is about. Someone who is, you know, reaching and reaching and reaching to, and maybe as well trying to be both, maybe trying to be the best actress she can be and the best mother she can be, both at the same time. And I think there is something as well going on in this book about like duality, because, and I'll tell you, this is one of those books where I quite a few times had read something and then in part two, and then was like going back to part one and going, oh, I need to check this, and then I wouldn't be able to find it. And one of the things I checked was about this Anna thing, right? So Anna is in part one, and she is obviously this mentor figure for Xavier, and she is the director of so she's kind of like the narrator's boss kind of thing. And she takes much more of a kind of a backseat of a role in the second half, because this Hannah character comes into it more, and she is obviously Xavier's girlfriend, partner, whatever, however you want to word it. But it was so, because of the similarity of the name, and I'm sure she must have done this deliberately, Hannah and Anna. You know, why would you do that if you didn't want readers to actually be confused by it? So I think there is also this kind of duality thing going on, where you could be going, you know, are they actually the same person, but in two different, you know, kind of scenarios sort of thing. So actually, I've changed my mind. I'm going to be coquettish now and mercurial and whatever. I'm putting it in tier 4. I am. Because I really love a book that does that explores meaning. Where are we getting on? And you know, it is also, isn't it, about connections, and that these, ultimately, the connections that she seems to have don't seem to be fulfilling. They don't seem to be meaningful. Not with her husband, not with her son, and not with her adoring fans, if they are adoring fans. And that's something I can massively get behind. And my book that I'm currently trying to get published is all about that. Actually, it's all about somebody who is searching for connection. Wow. There you go. I was not expecting this video to end like that. But that is the beauty of books. Yeah. If you think about them long enough, you know, you can get an awful lot out of them. And so, yeah, and obviously this is, yeah, better than I thought. There you go. That's what thinking about something does, though, isn't it? That's why we need to discuss stuff and think about stuff. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and keep reading, and I'll catch you next time.